I was muted. Hello. All right, well, here we go. Hey, everyone. My name is Fraser Cain. I'm the publisher of Universe Today, and this is your Weekly Space Hangout for Friday, May 23rd, 2014. And I'm assuming that there's some kind of holiday coming up or something. I don't understand, because it was just Victoria Day on Monday. But
Down here, yes, there is.
We don't have a holiday. We have to zap all the rocks.
All the rocks, all the time. And before we get rolling, I'm going to say hi. I'm going to say hi to Tony Lynch, to Ilad Avron, to Nancy Graziano, Michael Jobin, Guido Bibra, man, all our favorite fans, William Bacon, and Jim Meeker. You're all there, ready to go for the Weekly Space Hangout, and I want to say hi to all of you. Okay, well, let's say hi to the people that we have joining us. We've got Sandy Springman from Arecibo Observatory. Hey, Sandy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking some time out of your rock zapping.
There's none right now. It starts again in an hour and a half. It never ends.
Never ends. So many rocks, so much zapping. Dave Dickinson. Hey, David.
Hey, probably my last week on crappy internet here. So.
Yeah, it says clerk.
I know. It looks like a Klingon. I'm plugged into the Ethernet cable too, so it doesn't really help. So.
What does it say?
It's supposed to say Camelopardalids.
Say that again.
It's supposed to have the actual. It's supposed to say.
Camelopardalids.
Camelopardalids.
It's supposed to have the actual pronunciation for it.
All right, we're going to hear you mangle it every time differently throughout this entire show. All right. We got Morgan Renberg. Hey, Morgan.
Hey, Fraser.
Okay, so this week we are, of course, going to talk about the Camelopardalids meteor storm. We're going to talk about the, how do you say, is it IC3? IC3 spacecraft returning?
IC3.
IC3, the Dream Chaser wind tunnel, a new crater discovered on Mars, and a launch of a completely mysterious Atlas launch yesterday. So, well, let's get rolling. I think with the big story of this week is maybe going to be the Camelopardis meteor storm.
Yeah, there's a possibility, and this is something that's been kicking around for a few years now with some meteor researchers at SETI noticed that when they discovered comet 209P Linear back in, I believe it was 2006, that they did some analysis of the early streams of this meteor, and they found that they found that some of them come very close. The 1803 and the 1924 streams are coming very close to the orbit of the Earth tonight. Not the comet. The comet is actually going to pass the Earth about 20 lunar distances here toward the end of the month. So it's not the comet itself, which is only at 11th magnitude. It's not a big comet. It's a tiny comet. But these two streams are going to intersect the orbit of the Earth right around 7 o'clock Universal Time tomorrow morning, which places North America at a very good location because it's going to be early morning.
But would they be peaking, like, would they be starting to show up now? Should we start to see some indication of this is legit?
I'm going to start watching tonight here from Florida at sunset because meteor stream modeling and predictions are notoriously, meteors don't always do what we want them to do as far as when the streams are going to arrive. So there's a possibility. I know people over in Europe and UK are bummed they're not going to see it, but I've been telling them, it's like, you may want to look anyway in the morning because if the stream arrives early, you guys might get a meteor show, or we may get nothing. So.
Yeah, Ilad Avron is saying, hi everyone, I'm sitting on my deck hunting for meteors. I'll report live if and when I see any. So, but he's in the middle of a light polluted city, so.
In this radiant, since it's in the constellation of Camelopardalids, that it's going to be very far north, so it's actually placed very well for Northern Hemisphere viewers. And unlike most meteor showers, this one may start popping past midnight because that radiant is so high. Here in Florida, unfortunately, we have the north celestial pole is down about 30 degrees above the horizon, so the radiant at that key time, right around 7 Universal Time, 3 o'clock local here, it's going to be very low. So I'm kind of skeptical if we're going to see anything here. But I'm going to get up and start watching about probably 2 a.m. And if I see stuff, I'll just keep watching. So
I'm gonna pose a question to Sandy here, which is, with these kinds of meteor showers, why do we get sometimes a storm and sometimes not? What's kind of the orbital interactions that are going? And you're also muted.
That is beyond the scope of what I know. Sorry.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not a meteor person. I'm not.
Space rocks.
Space rocks. They're
Well,
itty bitty space rocks. We're about to hire someone who will totally nerd out about space
Will you
rocks.
zap? Will you be able to zap the
They're too small, and we
trail?
don't know where they are since we don't have ephemerides or orbits for them.
yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can, if you're a ham radio operator, you can bust out your equipment and you can listen to the radio signatures of meteors colliding with our atmosphere. So
That's
that's
cool.
Yeah.
something actually Jim
The,
Richardson used to do. So this is totally, if you were an amateur, you can listen along at home.
the big question is if this comet 209P Linear was active back in 1803. It was just discovered less than a decade ago, so nobody really knows was it producing dust back then in the 1920s and 1924 or 1803. If it wasn't producing anything, some comets sometimes they tend to turn on and off. If it wasn't producing dust, we may not see anything. And these streams are old enough that they're probably pretty well dispersed.
But each time the comet comes by, it's not taking the exact same path, right? It's taking a slightly different orbit based on the way, it's interacting with the different objects, with Jupiter,
This one,
whatever, right?
yeah, this one especially, it's had several orbital interactions tracing back the orbit. It's had several interactions with Jupiter to modify its orbit. And it's passing close enough that the Earth is going to tweak this meteor stream as it comes by too. It's on a 5.1 year. This is a periodic comet. That's the P in the 209P linear name. It's on a 5.1 year orbit, so it's a short period comet, and it's the ninth closest comet pass we've had. I think 1780 was Comet Lexell was the closest comet that's been recorded. Of course, we've been hit by comets back, in primordial times, but the closest comet pass that's been recorded since, we've been observing comets.
So let's say that it is the high end of this, 400 meteors per hour?
They're saying zenithal hourly rate of 400. And I think you got to keep in mind when you say zenithal hourly rate, or ZHR, that is an ideal rate. That is if the zenith is straight overhead, there's no light pollution, you have a full 360-degree view of the sky, which no observer has. Usually when you're watching, you've got a cone in front of you, so unless there's something really bright behind you, you're going to totally miss it. I've had my DSLR photographing meteors. What I usually do is I have it on time exposure, and I'm taking 5-minute exposures of the sky. And I've noticed every time that I've caught one on the DSLR, I totally missed it while I was watching with the naked eye. So that just tells me that I don't catch everything as an observer.
And when's the last time we've had a meteor storm that good? Like the
best
Leonids
one-
back in 2001 or 2000?
I saw the Leonids in 1998 from Kuwait because I was at a forward operating location of the Air Force, and it was very dark out there. And the zenithal hourly rate, I would say, was approaching 800 or 900 per hour. I've never seen a meteor storm quite like that. That was pretty. And back in 1966, the Leonids reached over thousands per hour. That was one of the legendary outbursts. The Leonids have they come around every November, but their big outburst is every 33 years. And our last one was 98, 99, 2000, and then we're not going to have another peak from them until about 32, 33. So
Elid has just given us an update. Still no meteors. So thanks.
Thanks for being out there.
Yeah, just keep reporting, and we'll keep everyone posted on whether or not.
It is going to be clear here in Florida, at least. The weather is cooperating. I know up around New England and some areas of Canada that's not the case, but yeah, just get out there and see what you see.
All right. Yeah, that's the way with meteor showers. You never know if it's going to be great or it's going to be mediocre, but it's the same thing with watching for the auroras. Like when you hear there's an aurora alert, just go to a place that's dark, look to the north, maybe you'll see it. You probably won't, but if you do, you will have seen a really great northern lights.
Do you mean meteor ochre? Sorry.
a meteor ochre. Nights of observing. Okay, well, let's move on to the IC spacecraft story.
IC3. It's like that slushy drink that maybe some of you grew up on in junk food
It's
locations.
an exotic form of ice.
Yeah,
okay.
so since Sunday, we've had a team of 3 folks here, Austin Ballant and Dennis Wingo, and they're trying to do some software-defined radio hacks and detect this spacecraft. So if you don't know what's going on, there's a spacecraft. It was launched in '78, I think, for this mission, and it was going to study the solar wind. It got redirected later to study actually 2 comets, and then NASA gave up on it in '97. They took hardware off of the Deep Space Network to be able to communicate with these spacecraft. And so some people did some math and said, good gosh, this spacecraft is going to be coming by Earth. It's going to be the closest it's going to be in 30 or 40 years. We really need to try to contact the spacecraft again because it's going to be going past the moon. We could put it in orbit around the moon. We could put it at the L1 Lagrange point with Earth. So we could have a spacecraft out there we can talk with and communicate with and get all sorts of cool data from. And this is just a waste to let it go. So if you but the problem is that there's no hardware left on any Deep Space Network telescopes that can talk with this spacecraft. So these folks did a crowdfunding thing, and they got about almost $150,000 now to get time on telescopes to talk to the spacecraft, to build hardware, to pay for some flights, and they've actually borrowed this, I think, $200,000 transmitter. It's a 500 kilowatt transmitter, and they're installing it on the telescope here as we speak. It arrived yesterday at about 6 p.m., and so it's going to send out a signal to talk to the IC-3 spacecraft, which has been detected. And there's been they've been looking at where the spacecraft is at the ephemeris, and they found that it's actually 250,000 kilometers away from where they thought it was going to be. So that's definitely going to update pointing. And apparently there's some insinuation that if they don't correct the orbit, since this thing still has fuel on board, that the spacecraft could possibly hit the moon. That is hearsay at this point, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, there are folks here doing all sorts of interesting things with radio. We do all of our radio processing and hardware here, so they're doing most of it in software. And I guess eventually they'll get that transmitter going and try to speak to the spacecraft. The other exciting thing that happened yesterday is that NASA signed a Space Act agreement with this team. And so citizen scientists are now going to be able to operate the spacecraft and not just talk to it, but operate it. And so I think that's pretty cool that NASA's saying, yeah, we have defunct hardware, but y'all can use it. We're not going to give you any money, but if you pay us, you can get time on our telescopes. So that's kind of cool.
I've offered many times in the past when NASA has thought that they might turn off some spacecraft, offered Canada to take over, but now it actually maybe that makes sense. Go for the crowdfunding. Like if they're going to shut down Cassini, let's crowdfund the maintenance funds and let's keep Cassini going. I wonder what the security is. Like would you have to enter the password to be able to log in to the spacecraft? I mean, so they're going to give you permission, but could they really stop you if you could pull together the broadcasting equipment, the receiving equipment, and you've done the telemetry? Is that spacecraft just open for business to anyone who's got a powerful enough transceiver?
I mean, I guess you have to know what frequency does it listen in on, what sort of signal is it expecting, what sort of what software do you need to talk to it? Though there's a funny story about that. Sometime in the last 20 years, there was some Mars spacecraft that got lost, and someone calls up my boss and said, "Can you go listen for this spacecraft? It's at this frequency in S-band, and the signature, the beacon would look like this." And so they go out and they get some signal, and it's from some other Martian spacecraft, and it has all these diagonal lines in it. And Mike talks to the guy. What's that about? It's like, oh, just don't pay any attention to those diagonal lines, with the implication that it was some, spy hardware on board there by the NSA or the NRO. So there are things out there that we're not supposed to, us civilians aren't supposed to know about. And it's a little weird. So don't try that. But
I think that was Mars Observer. They lost it as it was going for orbital insertion, yeah. Or I think I remember that, like 2000 or 2001 or so.
That sounds about right. The term we like to use is litho braking as opposed to arrow braking.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, that's cool. So if everything works as planned, when will people make contact with the spacecraft again?
I have no idea, but they are seeing signatures of the spacecraft. They're able to hear it, so hopefully they'll be able to talk with it. And
they're hoping for this week.
Power. Has it got an RTG on it, or has it got?
No.
It's got fuel.
Just got fuel.
Yeah.
Solar panels, probably.
I think I remember when I researched the article, there's no traditional imagers on that. It has detectors, but that's why you don't see any when they sent it off for, I think it was not Comet Halley, but they sent it after another comet. There was no pictures that it took, but it took readings of the measurements of the comet, like the dust or whatever.
That's really cool. All right, let's move on. So Morgan, you got a story about Dream Chaser wind tunnel tests.
Right, yeah. So as we are too well aware right now, NASA is sort of out of options for sending people to space. And we retired the space shuttle, and we were hitching rides aboard the Russian spacecraft, the Soyuz. And now even that seems like it's a little bit shakier than we might like, given the sort of rising international tensions between Russia, the United States, the European Union, over the situation in Ukraine. And so it's important, basically, for NASA to develop American-funded, American-built technologies and tools for getting into space. And we've talked a lot in the last month or two about SpaceX and the Dragon capsule, and they're working to make that a human-rated capsule. But that isn't the only effort that NASA is supporting. They're also supporting an effort by Boeing to develop a capsule, and they're supporting maybe the most interesting effort by this company called Sierra Nevada, and they're developing a space plane called the Dream Chaser. And you can kind of imagine the Dream Chaser as a scaled-down space shuttle, and at first glance you might confuse the two. But unlike the space shuttle, it doesn't launch like itself. It launches on top of an Atlas V rocket, just like many other satellites do. It goes up to space, it does its thing, but when it comes back down, it lands, and it can land on any commercial runway in the world. So basically, if you can land like a 747 or an A380, you can land the Dream Chaser. And you can imagine that that makes it more complicated than just plopping a capsule down into the ocean. And so as part of their contract, NASA required them to do this series of wind tunnel tests. And so that was completed this week at NASA Ames, and they basically took scale models of the Dream Chaser. There you go, you can see a picture there. And they put scale models of the Dream Chaser into wind tunnels, and you blast them with flight realistic conditions to see, is the spacecraft going to be stable as it glides down to the surface? Is wind building up pressure too much on any given point? That might be an engineering weakness of the spacecraft. And this will allow the engineers to fine-tune aspects of the spacecraft and get it ready for launch. And of course, completing these tests basically unlocks the next stage in the project. NASA gives Sierra Nevada $20 million, and they move on to the next piece of technology to develop. And this is all building up to a planned 2016 launch. They're planning to launch in November of 2016 to orbit for the first time. And that's commensurate with SpaceX's goals of launching the Dragon capsule. They're even thinking maybe late 2015. I think probably mid-2016 is more realistic. And so by 2 years from now, we'll be in a lot better shape in terms of getting people to the space station, getting people to the orbit about the moon, and getting work done in low Earth orbit. And every step through all of these different processes takes us a little bit closer in that direction.
Does the Dream Chaser look a little bit like the space plane, the military, like the X-37?
X-37.
It does look like the X-37. I think they're completely unrelated in terms of their development, and actually very little is known about the X-37, other than it's completed more than 400 days in orbit, but nobody knows what they're doing with it or really what it's intended for in the long run.
There's nobody on board, right?
No. Nobody on board, correct.
That we're
it kind of
aware
reminds me of the Virgin Galactic spacecraft too, although that isn't designed, of course, to go into orbit.
Dream Chaser looks like Salvador Dali designed a space shuttle to me.
Really?
It's got that melted clock kind of look to it.
It's great to see other potential solutions for being able to get humans into space, because, I mean, the talks between the Russians and the Americans seems to be going south pretty quickly now about who's gonna, how long people are gonna be able to use it. There's threats about not letting, keeping the International Space Station open for a long time.
Talk of trampolines and
trampolines obviously is in the end what's going to go there.
even if these problems between the U.S. and Russia don't actually pan out to a stoppage of flight, having multiple launch capabilities will reduce the cost and increase the flexibility that we have for getting people into space, and that's just going to increase the number of things we can do going forward.
Well, the Europeans have the Jules Verne, which I know is a cargo vessel. I wonder if they could make that one man-rated.
Yeah, I don't know
Human-rated.
what it would take to take an existing cargo-rated spacecraft and
Yeah.
sort of upgrade it to man-rated capability.
And the Chinese have the capability.
Yes, unfortunately, the Chinese are the only people we're less friendly with than the Russians when it comes to space right now, and
Yeah.
so
You
I
know,
wouldn't hold out
it's-
any hope for that.
It's interesting, speaking of the Chinese, their Tiangong-1 space station is still up there. I mean, I remember last year they were talking about re-entering it by the end of 2013 was what we were hearing in the sat tracking community. But it's still up there right now, so I wonder if they have further plans for it they haven't announced yet. So it's just interesting it's still there.
And India is developing their own manned space capsule as well. It's kind of a similar in design to the Chinese, which is a similar design to the Russian Soyuz that we've been using now for decades.
All right, so one quick story, David. There was an Atlas launch
Yeah,
yesterday.
speaking of bootleg Russian rocket motors,
Right.
one launched here off Cape Canaveral because it was ULA, United Launch Alliance, Atlas V, launched with a classified payload for the National Reconnaissance Office. It was NRO 66 was the name of the mission. So there was no published orbit or two-line elements, or there's no NORAD tracking. There's a bunch of us in the satellite tracking community that are out like watching in our backyards trying to spot these things. So there's nothing official out there on SpaceTrack as far as where it went or what it's doing, but it was obviously a classified payload. And it kind of did tie into that whole controversy about ULA and SpaceX and what's going on with these, because it didn't really come to the fore that ULA is using the RD-180 motor is a Russian-designed built motor. And ULA says they have, I think, about 2 years left of these motors before their stockpile runs out. But it all kind of ties into yesterday's launch was an example of at least one more of those being expended. So
Here's an interesting question. Patrick Calhoun asks, could I take a picture of the X-37, or would that be illegal?
well, you can see it. I track it. It's one of my high interest items that if it's making a pass over, usually sat spotters are out watching for it. And I've seen Ralph Vandenberg over in Europe, I believe, has taken images of it. There are some of these guys like Thierry Legault that do these awesome ISS images that have imaged the X-37. You don't see a lot of detail on it because it's not big. It's a little bigger than if you've ever seen it at Edwards Air Force Base or Vandenberg, I believe, is where they land it. When it lands, it's a little bigger than a large SUV. It's not a big vehicle, but you can see it with the naked eye when it passes over.
Yeah. There are some press pictures of it too, I think, so it's not like it's completely unknown.
Yeah, I think what's really classified, the super secret stuff, is what's in its payload bay. They're probably testing new technologies, would be my guess. They probably use that for interchangeable payloads, just like they did the space shuttle. It's got a much smaller payload bay, but they're probably putting different things in there and testing them.
But isn't that super weird that there is this completely separate space program that's going on, that there is essentially another space shuttle? It's not quite as big as the space shuttle was and not as much cargo, but this space plane exists. It lands in a similar way. It just slips under the radar.
Yeah,
all the time.
It's been that way all through the Cold War and after the Cold War. There is this second space program that, unless something happens, we rarely ever hear about what's going on out there. So even back with the keyhole and the Corona satellites way back in the 60s, that was when they actually had to use film. I just wrote an article about this for another site. They had to eject the film and snatch it mid-air on re-entry and then bring it back for development. That was back.
That's amazing.
That's how they did surveillance, like clandestine surveillance of these with these satellites. It's incredible. There was a Nova episode about that too. It's really incredible when you think about how far the technology's come now.
Like they would pick it up with these high flying surveillance aircraft, and then
it was similar to like the C-130 Combat Talon with the little forks in the front that would actually go and snatch the parachuting capsule out of midair so it wouldn't fall off into the ocean, and then they would bring it back and develop it. They'd rush it back so analysts could look at these bases in Russia and see what they were doing. But
Well, you used to be in part of the Air Force, right? You must have worked on some of these, or you're not at liberty to speak about it.
I never got into Space Command. That was the one thing I always wish I had. Got into Air Force Space Command is very tiny. I was in the Air Force, but just so I could say I was in Space Command, it's a cool thing to have after your name.
Yeah, it sounds science fiction-y.
Yes.
So there's a new crater on Mars.
There is a new crater on Mars. And this is kind of a reminder. Let me get the picture going here. This is a reminder that, the solar system is not a static place. And we think that Mars is hit many times every year with objects that leave craters on the surface, but rarely do we get to see such a big one, and rarely do we have such precise knowledge of it. And so what you're looking at here is a picture of the surface of Mars taken by the HiRISE imager on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And the crater of interest is this nice big guy right in the middle. And this was actually first discovered recently using the weather instruments on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. So they have special cameras that are much lower resolution that are used for tracking dust devils and cloud formations and dust storms on Mars. And somebody was going through this and they noticed this little black spot on the surface that hadn't been there before. And one of the nice things about our observations of Mars, or really any of our observations carried out by NASA, is that after a short period of time, all of that data is public. And so they were able to go back into the archives and look back 2 years and find an image where this crater was present, and then find an image where the crater was not present. And normally those are like months and months apart, and we can say, well, it hit sometime between October of 2010 and December of 2012. But in this case, they were able to pinpoint it down to just a 24-hour period between March 27th of 2012 and March 28th of 2012. And that's unusual that we can pin it down to such detailed time frame. This is also the biggest crater that we've discovered in a before-after scenario like that. It's about 45 meters across, or about 150
that's a really
feet.
big meteor.
Yeah, that's the size of the crater. Yeah. And they believe that the size of the object that hit it might be similar to the size of the meteor that broke up over Chelyabinsk last year. And so had that made it down to the surface, it could have created a crater that looked something like this.
Amazing. That's really cool. And Morgan, I guess we forgot to plan this out in advance. Have you been staying on top of Cosmos?
Oh, I haven't caught this week's episode yet, actually.
No, neither have I. But we didn't talk about last week's episode. What was it about again? I forget.
I caught Sundays very briefly. I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting that he went ahead, where they do the cosmic calendar, where they talk about the last 13.7 billion years. He actually did that projection about what the next 13.7 billion years might be like. I thought that was kind of something that they didn't do in the old Cosmos. Was kind of nifty. Talking about the death of the sun and how what human civilization, what kind of paths we might want to take, and if we're going to stay around for geologic time or not. Back to the whole Hall of Extinction thing, which I think was kind of an interesting addition they've done this series to.
Right. It was Faraday and Maxwell was the one.
Right. That was 2 weeks ago.
That was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to watch all the Cosmos, the new ones, rapid fire. Just have an online hangout party or something. We've done with the old Cosmos before. I've sat and we've all watched it on YouTube, all the episodes, and watched them in one day.
Have you been watching the new Cosmos, Sandy? No.
No, I don't have a TV.
Television.
They put it up on Hulu. That's where I don't have TV, but I've been watching it.
I don't watch TV.
It's probably best.
He's out of the U.S. too, which probably traps him.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, Hulu works here just fine, but I don't watch TV.
Yeah, you just listen to the radio.
I love my radio, my big night radio.
I think we're out of our stories. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to bring up before we just ran through a bunch of questions?
My brain's full of meteors. Visits Puerto Rico and wants a cat, or lives in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Dallas, I'll deliver you a cat on July 2nd.
I heard a dog.
Sorry, I'll mute that.
Oh, okay. Does anybody want that dog?
Not the cat who gave me these, but.
Oh. So John Jogurst notes, Heavens Above will track the X-37 along with its items of interest. So yeah, Heavens Above is a great way to do that.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine. I've been using Heavens Above since I remember when Mirror was up when I lived in Italy, tracking Mirror on Heavens Above. So it's been around that long, like 2000, I think, or so. And it's an outstanding site. I still use it to this day for tracking satellites. And they have the whole database of like every satellite back to the Vanguards are still up there from 1958. I think they're still orbiting, and they're up there in the database too. So talking about old spacecraft.
And John also notes that the Dream Chaser is more of a follow-on on the U.S.-Russian lifting body concepts, which is, yeah, it really definitely looks like the X. Yeah, so the X-37 was NASA's X-40 and is more shuttle-like. Fuselage, wings, tail. Jules Verne and the Orbital Cygnus have no re-entry capability. Thanks, John. That's fantastic. Okay, so that's why we can't use the Jules Verne, because it can't make it back.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a classic picture of that people always use to, when there's a bright meteor, people will use this picture of the Jules Verne, the video of it re-entering, and they'll say that's what it is.
Thanks for reminding me. We'll probably see stuff like that recycled tonight, like for the Meteor Shower.
Yeah. I just saw one, and this Jules Verne crackling and popping in the atmosphere.
There's the footage of Mir as it re-entered over the South Pacific. that gets recycled quite a bit. And yeah, we see these all the time, so we kind of you're welcome to try to stump us, but I've seen most of them many times.
Guido Bieber notes that you can follow on Twitter IC3 Reboot. And that is, I guess, the attempts to talk to and communicate with the spacecraft. So if you want to do that, you can do that. And Guido also notes that Amazon.com has Cosmos DVDs and Blu-rays at drastically reduced prices, $25 plus shipping.
I have a DVD drive, but yes, you can buy Cosmos. Yay!
You know,
that's the old Cosmos, though.
I was sweating whether they were going to put Cosmos out, the new one, online for us to watch, or they were going to very tightly control it like a lot of channels do with their programming. So I was prepared to buy it on Amazon if I had to, by episode. But luckily Hulu's putting them up. Fox has been pretty good about giving access for us TV Zero folks.
All right, let me see if I've got any more questions. Otherwise, we may just wrap this up quick and early.
Not many of us this week.
No, and not a lot of big stories. Apparently, it's some kind of holiday. Everyone's tired from Victoria.
It's been all Meteor Shower all the time this week.
Yeah, it really has.
Any other stories.
Hugo Burnham wants to know, are there any seismic detectors on MSL? Would they be able to detect a meteorite impact on Mars?
There are no seismic detectors on MSL.
That's
However, there may be seismic detectors on InSight.
Yeah, InSight.
InSight? What is InSight? I'm intrigued.
InSight is to appease the geophysicists who have been begging, demanding, nagging forever. We want seismometers on Mars. And there's really only one group that builds portable seismometers that you can send to other planets, and they're French. Just FYI. So they're going to put this spacecraft on Mars. It's not going to last for very long, and it's going to study how Mars shakes. So you get a Christmas present, and it's all wrapped up. How do you find out what's in it? You take it. Is there a box around somewhere? And you shake it! You shake it and you find out what's inside of it. So things will hit Mars, and Mars probably has Mars quakes and things like that. And you can figure out a lot about the interior structure of a planet by how it shakes. And so InSight will do all that. And it's going to have a little thing that drills down to the surface not very far. I have some friends who are probably going to be working on surface operations. So that will be a very cool mission.
Right, and actually,
it launches from Vandenberg in 2016. March of 2016-ish, and the reason they're launching it from Vandenberg is because they have fuel to burn on this rocket. And they're like, why not launch from Vandenberg? It will help with launch pad congestion on the East Coast. And I love that it is 2014, and I can talk about how you can help alleviate launch pad congestion.
That's great.
I wonder if that's the first.
About InSight, talk about InSight.
I wonder if that's the first interplanetary launch they've done from there. I can't recall any
It is the first interplanetary launch they've done from there. NASA doesn't think that they've done anything else.
That's kind of cool.
Someone was asking how hard it is to get time on Arecibo. Should I answer that, or should we talk more about it?
Go ahead, answer that.
So to get time on Arecibo, you apply for time. It's like most telescopes. You can. It's It's a process, and so you get submit a proposal and you say, this is what I want to look at and this is why it's important. Proposals get grades. A, this should absolutely get time. B, if we have some time, stick it in. C, this proposal wasn't very good. Maybe if there's some bad time, we'll put you in maybe. And then there's grades where you don't get telescope time. And then we have a committee that actually just met today to decide when these proposals will get scheduled. And we have a scheduler, and he is literally a human matrix inverter. So if you've ever done over-constrained problems, this guy needs to figure out, okay, this person wants 3 days in a row away from like 2 weeks after full moon to do this thing, or this person needs 3 consecutive nights in a row when it's probably not going to be raining at night. Or then these astronomers come in, they're like, surprise, solar flare, everyone gets kicked off the telescope for a week, and we run atmospheric radar to detect these atmospheric ionosphere phenomena. So it's a very complicated procedure, but anyone can apply. If you really want telescope time, you can buy telescope time, and I know groups at Yale have done that, among other folks. So if you really want guaranteed time for things, and actually the Planetary Radar group here, we've sort of bought time in that we have this rather substantial grant from NASA. Thank you, U.S. taxpayers. I'm not one of you right now. For funding Near-Earth Object Observation Program and for getting us telescope time to help follow up with these rocks before they follow up with us. So I hope that answered your question, Alexander.
That's awesome. And I guess you don't have to deal with the pesky problems of that it's daytime or clouds.
No, it's sacrilegious. It's blasphemous to be observing during the day. It's just like, what? This is wrong. It still feels right to go into the control room at night and to observe. But radar is like the honey badger. It don't care. So we work during daytime, we work during nighttime, we've observed when it rains. The only problem with lightning is that we have these tie-down motors, and if lightning strikes the tie-down motors, that would be bad. So we turn off the tie-downs when it's lightning and thunder, so that keeps the telescope tensioned and keeps it in focus. So that's not great. But we do like rain because rain cools down the telescope during the day, and when it gets hot, the telescope actually expands and it sags down the telescope structure and the cables. So rain is really good, because it helps keep the telescope in focus, which is just so sick and bad if you're an optical observer.
Yeah, you want the telescope to just tighten up and yeah. Cool. Well, let's wrap things up. So Sandy, where do people find out more?
You can find me at Sandy on Twitter, or you can find me tweeting about Arecibo radar, though in about 5 weeks that will be Jim Richardson taking it over, who's our super enthusiastic new hire who's going to come down here and do models of asteroids and write lots of papers, and it'll be excellent.
One last update from Elad. 0 meteors over Haifa. Israel. So
say hi to Haifa.
He's in the future, and so far a meteor storm has not scoured that half of the planet from the Earth. So
oh, it's good to know.
Good to know. Yeah. I'm still going to go watch.
I will.
It's a little early. All right, David.
I am AstroGuys with the Z. Was active on UniverseTodayCanada.com and Listosaur this week, and I will be watching for meteors tonight, and we'll see if this vindicates the predictors' models, or if it's we'll see what we see.
Right on, Morgan.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Morgan Renberg, and you can read my writings at cosmicchatter.org.
Fantastic. And once again, I'm F. Cain on Twitters, and you can find me publishing Universe Today. And if you haven't already, click subscribe on this YouTube channel. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this week. Thanks to our panel for bringing the news, and we'll see you all next week.